Greetings, this is Greg. This is part 2 of my Fiat 124 series. 124 or Miata? Will the real innovator please stand up? When the Miata was released in 1989, it had features that were at the time almost unheard of in an entry-level sports car. These included a double overhead cam engine, 5-speed transmission, 4-wheel disc brakes, twin A-arm front suspension, rear-wheel drive, top that was easy to operate, and more. Collectively, these features were typically found only in high-end or near-exotic sports cars, but the Miata was priced as an entry-level sports car, about the same as a similarly equipped Ford Mustang. It was hailed as the return of the 60s British sports car, but with far superior Japanese build quality and reliability. Now, the original Miata was a great car, but anyone who says it's similar mechanically to any British sports car from the 60s simply never worked on those cars, because nothing could be further from the truth. It's often said that the Miata was based on the original Lotus Elan, and from a styling perspective, I'm certain that's true. I've seen a quote from someone on the design team supporting that, and, well, just look at it. The front end looks just like an Elan. However, that's where the similarity ends. Under the skin, these two cars might as well have been designed on different planets. The Miata is a unit body car, steel body. The Lotus is a backbone chassis car with a fiberglass body draped over it. That means the chassis are about as different as they could possibly be. The Lotus has a 4-speed gearbox, not 5. The Lotus uses a kingpin suspension. The British, interestingly, were the last holdouts using that. Everyone else had gone to ball joints, but the Brits held on to kingpins into the mid-70s. The Miata, of course, has ball joints. The Miata used an engine designed with double overhead cams and used a belt to drive them. The Lotus did have a twin-cam engine, but it was designed as a single non-overhead cam type, and the twin-cam head was added. Not only that, the cams were chain-driven and driven along with the still-present original cam in the block, which is very strange. The Lotus engine is nothing like the Mazda engine, except in the fact that both are twin-cam 4-cylinders. Perhaps the biggest difference is in the respective cars' places in the market. The Lotus was priced like a Corvette or Porsche. It was not an entry-level car. When the Miata was introduced, again, it was priced like a Ford Mustang. What about other British cars of the 60s? Well, none were even remotely similar to the Miata. Try and put the top up or down in a Triumph TR6. It's more like erecting a tent than the quick mechanism of the Miata. Even if we just look at the most basic features of the Miata, double overhead cam, 5-speed transmission, 4-wheel disc brakes, we won't find any British cars from the 60s that have all those features at anywhere near the price of, say, a Mustang, if at all. So, did the Miata follow in the footsteps of a 60s sports car? I'm going to argue that it did, but that car was the Fiat 124 Spider. Like the Miata, the 124 had twin A-arm front suspension, 5-speed transmission, an engine designed with belt-driven double overhead cams, a top that was easy to put up and down, 4-wheel disc brakes, and more. The Fiat had all of this when it was released in 1966. Furthermore, the Fiat occupied the exact same spot in the market that the Miata took up later in 1989, meaning the Fiat 124 was priced about like a Ford Mustang. The original Fiat 124 Spider engine had decent performance for its time and a lot of performance potential. It was rugged and reliable. It is actually the most winning engine ever in the World Rally Championship history, being used not only in the 124 but in the Fiat 131 and several Lancias. Of course, the Miata had a head with 16 valves and independent rear suspension, something that the base Fiat 124 did not have. However, the original 124 Abarth did have those features, so I would argue that everything that makes the Miata what it is was first on the Fiat 124. Now, I know Miata guys are not going to like this statement, but in my view, the original Miata was an updated and improved Fiat 124. The Miata was clearly the imitator here, and it's not the British sports cars that it's imitating. Now, there is something that the Miata does have that is highly reminiscent of British sports cars. and typically not found in entry-level Italian sports cars of the 60s, and that's the seating position. In the Miata, like most of the British sports cars, you sit pretty far back in the car, and there's a good reason for it. To understand this, let's look at an original 62 Alfa Romeo Giulia. This is an early sports sedan. Like most sports sedans, the designers pushed the engine pretty far forward. This allows the front seats to be relatively far forward, leaving more room for the designers to use in the rear seat and trunk area. Generally speaking, the Italians built their sports cars on sedan chassis, so the Spider variant of this car has the seating position relatively far forward. In the case of the classic Fiat 124, there are 4 variants: a sedan, a station wagon, which is usually called an estate car, a Spider, of course, and a coupe, and they're all on the same chassis. There's some slight variations in wheelbase. Thus, in the original 124 Spider, the driver sat farther forward than the driver in a typical British sports car. If you look at most Italian sports cars from the classic era, most have the driver seated very near or just slightly aft to the center of the wheelbase. On the other hand, for the most part, the British designed their chassis as sports cars from the outset. This allowed them to move the engine farther back for superior weight distribution. This moves the driver back as well. If you look at most British sports cars from the classic era of the 60s and into the 70s, you will see that the driver is located usually well aft of the center of the wheelbase. The drawback to this, of course, is you lose a lot of space that could be used for a small seat, small back seat, or an improved trunk. None of this means that the British cars handled better than the Italian cars in spite of their weight distribution advantage. Generally speaking, they didn't. The Italians made up for weight distribution with better suspensions. Now, let's fast forward to the Miata of 1989. It was designed as a 2-seat sports car. Mazda positioned the engine much as the British did in the 60s, which makes perfect sense considering the car doesn't have a sedan counterpart. The modern Fiat 124, of course, shares a chassis with the Miata, and neither car has a sedan counterpart, thus their engines are located pretty far back. In the case of the 124, the entire engine is aft of the front spindles. Sometimes this is referred to as a front mid-engine configuration. Thus, the new 124 has not only great weight distribution, it has an excellent suspension, and it's one of the best handling cars you can buy, certainly for the money. The new 124 is a true successor to the original 124 in every way. Like the original, it's priced as an entry-level sports car. It has an advanced engine that performs well. It has a lot of performance potential, a great suspension, great brakes. If you're a fan of the original 124 and you've been hesitant to test drive the new one because of its what's referred to as its Mazda heritage, I really encourage you to go drive the new one. I really think you'll like it. The new car is the logical evolution of the original. Its design is legitimately descended from the original, and it's a much better car in every way. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and have a great day.